What's up, everybody? Welcome to GoJo and Golic. Mike Golic Jr., Mike Golic Sr., Jesse Cofield holding it down for us in the DraftKings studio in Boston. We are brought to you by Wrangler, made for the ride of life. Save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order using promo code GoJo15. Awesome show queued up here on a football Monday. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us the 5-star rating. Check us out live Monday through Friday from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern right here on the DraftKingsNetwork.com, DraftKings YouTube channel, Samsung TV Plus, Roku, all the good places. Tell a friend, bring a friend. We got a ton to get to today. The call heard round the world and the Kansas City Chiefs loss to the Buffalo Bills. A banger of a game involving the Los Angeles Rams and the Baltimore Ravens. But, Dad, last night, you had a good one yourself. I knew it was good when coming on air, Chris Collinsworth just starts to chuckle with glee during the first drive of the game. There's no analysis. He's just thrilled to be in the presence of a rivalry that you lived as a player and got to call last night for Westwood One in Eagles-Cowboys, and it lived up to every bit of it.
Yeah, it did. I mean, and just getting ready for that game, Eagles-Cowboys, when I was in Philadelphia, I mean, it was Cowboy week. It was just a different week where the hitting got a little more intense during the week and everything was just a little more intense because you're not really going to fool anybody in this game when it's a division opponent and these two teams know each other so well. As I mentioned over and over in the broadcast, it's about all the one-on-one situations, swing passes, one-on-one, receiver against DB, one-on-one, who wins that battle, running back coming through the line, safety coming up right at the line of scrimmage, who wins that battle, who wins the battles on the O&D line. That's what every game comes down to that, but really in the division games, that's really what it comes down to because these teams know each other so well, and right now, Dallas is right at the top of the league. I mean, the way they're playing since they lost to Philadelphia in Week 9, they're now 5-0, been scoring over 40 points a game, having almost 450 yards a game. They have been absolutely on fire. And, oh, by the way, the defense is pretty good as well. So it was impressive to watch with Philadelphia. Listen, the top three teams in the NFC is we're going to talk about is San Francisco, Dallas, and Philly. It seems like two have the arrow going up and one has the arrow going down.
Yeah, it is a very, very unfun time in the city of brotherly love right now. I'd imagine the call-in lines today on local radio are going to be jam-packed. Yeah. But speaking of jam-packed, we're excited. We don't usually get a ton of guests around here on Monday, but we get to welcome in a pretty darn good one today, former NFL All-Pro and current member of the TNF on Prime broadcast team, Richard Sherman, hanging out with us now. Sherman, we appreciate the time this morning, man. We were just talking about that Philly-Dallas rivalry. I feel like for you, and people, I think, associate a lot of that stuff with like the pre-free agency NFL, the bad blood in a lot of those rivalries. You were inside the NFC West for a long time as a part of a great one there. Did it still, in your mind, have that same sort of hate between both sides that we used to see?
I think there were probably individual matchups that had the hate and had the animosity more than the teams necessarily. You know what I mean? I think at the end of the day, you go out there and you try to execute. I'm sure you feel but guys aren't there usually long enough to really appreciate these rivalries. I mean, in this one, I would say guys have been there long enough. You got to talk about Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham have been there for 10 plus years. It seems like Jason Kelsey the same way. So I'm sure Lane Johnson, those guys appreciate the rivalry and appreciate the intensity of it for sure.
And also talk about how kind of the difference when it's a division opponent, and especially the second game that year, where it can be less about game plan because everybody knows each other's game plan and what they do, and really more about those individual performances.
Yeah, that's a great point because that's exactly what it is. You know, you've played each other for years. You know tendencies. You know what guys like. You know their favorite moves. If you're an offensive lineman, if you're a pass rusher, you know how they set. So then it's about the details. It's about intensity. It's about grit. It's about who's going to outwork each other during the game, who's going to want it long enough, who's going to break first. And I think clearly yesterday, Dallas had their number. Dallas had them from the beginning to the end.
So Dallas dominates that game. We've now seen 2 games in a row where the Eagles have faced off against the other NFC elite and come up woefully short. Richard, how concerned are you about this Philadelphia Eagles team and their ability to kind of pull out of this?
Yeah, I would be very concerned. I mean, they had beaten some really good teams throughout early season. that don't look as good of wins anymore. You know, I mean, you talk about Miami and what they've done. Sometimes they show up. Usually they don't in these scenarios. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs, who've taken some bad losses the last 2 weeks, who've lost 2 of their last 4, lost 2 of 6. I mean, only won 2 of the last 6 games. But yeah, this got a Philadelphia team has to be self-reflecting because they haven't played well in the last 2 weeks, and these teams look clearly better than them in the last 2 weeks. And you don't know if it's fatigue or just lack of execution.
And going forward, they kind of went through their gauntlet. The Dallas Cowboys have that coming up with the Bills and with Miami, where Philly finishes with the Seahawks, the Giants twice, and the Cardinals once. So certainly winnable games. But I don't know about the way they're playing. Richard, in calling the game last night, it feels to me that Jalen Hurts' knee is bothering him. I saw him bailing out of throws a little bit without the pressure right on him. I saw him run one time where sometimes when he can get some extra yards, he just slid instead. It seems like when he is aggressive, how good that team is, but it seems like he is favoring that knee a little bit. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Well, there was a play where he slid and they landed on him,
yep,
where he kind of grimaced, where it looked like, you know, maybe something was bothering him for sure. And after that point, he was doing everything you said. But I think Dallas felt that. I think Dan Quinn felt that. And they started bringing those zero pressures. And I had never seen him retreat and respond the way he did in this game to the zero pressures. Like, it looked like he wasn't aware. They didn't have a plan for it. He missed. I think he missed 2 throws on it, and one he hit to Devontae Smith, but he had to slow down, and Stephon Gilmore tackles him immediately. Right. So it just looked like, I mean, you may be right that maybe it's the knee that has him second-guessing himself out there.
So for Dallas on the other side, they seem to have really turned it on ever since that loss in the last game that they played against the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm curious, Richard, between that and what you saw from the 49ers yesterday in a division game against the Seahawks, do you feel like Dallas has closed the gap at all there, or is there still a big shelf between the 49ers and the other 2 top NFC teams?
It's hard for me to say they've closed the gap. You know, just looking at how San Francisco handled Philly last week, made it look easy. After not doing anything in the first quarter, they had -6 yards in the first quarter, then ran off 450 yards, or 400 or so yards after that. I mean, it just seems like they're a class above them and Philly, Dallas and Philly at this point. And until they get on the field and Dallas gets an opportunity to show them that it's an even playing field or they're at the same level, I can't see it any other way.
You know, you look at that NFC and it's San Francisco, Dallas, and Philly, and really a drop-off after that. And quite honestly, at this point, it's probably San Francisco and Dallas, and Philly has to play a little catch-up here. How about in the AFC? Do you think anybody is separating themselves in the AFC?
No, that's what's concerning about the AFC, because it looks like anybody can win it. I mean, before C.J. Stroud and them just got trounced by the New York Jets, I would have said they were a dangerous team that could pretty much upset just about anybody in that conference. But right now, I don't feel like there's anybody you can trust. Do you? I mean, I can't imagine you trusting Baltimore after the dogfights they've been in and the games they've lost. It's hard to trust Miami without beating a plus 500 opponent. It's hard to trust Kansas City, you know, without any offensive weapons outside of Travis Kelce.
So speaking of Kansas City, I do want to get to that game. We all saw the end game sequence there. Kadarius Toney called for the offsides on a play that ended in a spectacular touchdown from Travis Kelce. Sherman, you've been on the other side of a lot of this. You've seen the mechanics receivers go through pregame. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes both voiced a lot of their concerns that we'll get to in a little bit here. But from the way you saw it on that play, was that the right call in that moment? Should a ref be making that call?
No question. And he's standing past the ball, past the line of scrimmage, and looking directly at the ball. I mean, this is Pop Warner Day 1 stuff. The receiver corner mechanisms, you're usually looking down at the ref. You're pointing because the corners, we're trying to get as close as we possibly can in press coverage. So we're checking with the ref. Hey, am I over the ball? Am I over the ball? Am I good? And they'll give you a thumbs up. Hey, you're good. Or they'll tell you, hey, back up. You're past the ball. But if you don't check with them, and I don't know if Kadarius Toney did. I cannot say he did. There has been an instance this season where Terry McLaurin checked with the referee. The referee gave him the thumbs up, and then 2 seconds later threw the flag. So let's not get crazy. It could happen like that, but it did not look like he checked with the ref, because the ref would have probably told him to back up.
Yeah, he didn't, and the ref after the game said normally we do give a warning, but it was so egregious of how offside he was that we didn't. And again, as Mike said, you've been out there in this. Are you owed that by the ref if you ask him? Does he have to? Have you been in situations where the ref doesn't answer you?
Yeah, I have not been in a situation where he hasn't answered me where I've given him enough time. Sometimes it's happening too fast, and he's panicking, or he's dealing with something in his belt or something, and he hasn't answered me, but he hasn't thrown a flag on me either. So, but they don't. That's what the weird thing about offenses, man, in this league. They always want every advantage. Just like you want to be all sides now and then get a warning.
So true. Said, haven't we given you enough?
My goodness. You get every call. You got every rule in your favor. Now you said, hey, don't call the flag when I'm offside. Just warn me, brother.
So true.
So you mentioned the lack of like a clear leader in the AFC. Does that make you feel any better about betting on the Chiefs long term here? Are we at the point in the season where this is just who they are, and expecting different out of Kansas City would be foolish on our part? How are you feeling about the Chiefs right now?
I'm feeling that way. I feel like if you expect anything different than what they've put on tape for this season, then you're being foolish. They haven't shown any consistency at wide receiver. They have one of the highest drop rates in the National Football League. Besides that, I think they might have the highest. It's them and Dallas battling for the most drop passes in the National Football League right now. But outside of Travis Kelce, there's nobody that you say you could depend on and that you can viably say that, hey, at the end of the game, at the end of the day, third down, if Travis is shut down, this is who I'm going to. You can't say that confidently in any capacity. So I can't believe, and this defense had been playing really well, and they played pretty solid in this game. They held Buffalo to 20 points, but the game before they got kind of moved around. They got bullied a little bit. Green Bay had their way. Jordan Love had his way with this defense. So no, I can't even trust Kansas City right now.
Yeah, it had been Rashee Rice had been that receiver for a while, and then Pacheco was there, and then Pacheco was out in that game. So I'm with you, and we've talked about that. They haven't had that go-to person. Do you think, we've talked about this during the season a lot, that defenses seem to be doing better than offenses. Now, at one point a few weeks ago, we had hit the number 50 of the amount of different starting quarterbacks we've had for the year. So is that playing in your mind a big role into why the offensive seem to be behind the defenses a bit still?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a part of it. What is there, 7 starting quarterbacks, 6, 7 starting quarterbacks out right now? But it's just the quality of football, the quality of execution isn't there. I mean, at the end of the day, the refs are getting too involved in these games. Defenses are adjusting. Defenses are getting better. They're getting faster. They're getting more intense. People are getting their D-line stronger. That's why you see guys getting to the quarterback. Because at the end of the day, that's the only thing you can affect is you can pressure the quarterback. And so defenses are bringing different looks. And Kansas City's situation, usually their offense is way ahead of their defense, and their defense usually doesn't catch up till around the AFC Championship or Super Bowl. Then they usually play really well, and they go on to win those games. But I honestly can't explain this kind of disparity this late in the season, because it usually evens out by now.
We've seen so many backup quarterbacks in, you're right, but one place where we've seen the starter play and start to play even better as of late is the Denver Broncos here, Richard, a guy you know very well, and Russell Wilson had a couple of big-time throws yesterday. Have you been surprised about this kind of surge that we've seen? It seems like they've gone back to a lot of the things that made him successful when he was playing with you in the Legion of Boom.
Yeah, I mean, it's surprising because their defense gave up 70 points in that game, so you would have thought this is a bad defense and they're going to continue to play bad, but they turned it around right after that game, and they've been a top 5 defense statistically in just about every category since that game. And, I mean, you look at them holding the Chargers to 7 points. You look at them, what they did to the Kansas City Chiefs a few weeks ago, what they've done in these consecutive games during this streak. They played like one of the best defenses in the National Football League, and that's after trading away Randy Gregory and some really good players and getting rid of pretty good players. So it just seems like maybe Vance Joseph and Sean Payton and Russell Wilson have found a rhythm to this team, and it looks really cool. I mean, they were starting off 1-5, and now they're one game behind Kansas City for the division.
Yeah, it's definitely getting tight there. Jets get a big win over the Texans. C.J. Stroud gets knocked out with a concussion. Zach Wilson played really well, but is this now going to continue the Aaron Rodgers talk coming back, which we thought maybe was put away? Do we think that resurfaces again? And do you actually think that's something that could happen?
I highly doubt it could happen. I can't imagine it happening, but it's only got, 14 more days for them to determine it. Because they open the window, and if they don't determine it in the next 14 days, it's definitely not happening. But Zach Wilson played, honestly, maybe his best game as a pro yesterday. I mean, out of nowhere, after with all the rumors that he was reluctant to come back, he goes out there and puts his best foot forward and helps his team win in a big way. Does everybody wish it happened sooner? I'm sure. But it was really cool to see them respond the way they did, to see the defense continue to play the way they have. But I just don't know if Aaron's coming back. I mean, it just wouldn't make sense in this situation. Even if they're in the playoffs, it would just be like, hey, maybe Zach Wilson is playing with his hair on fire. Let the kid cook. And if he's not, then they won't be in that situation. So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah, a lot up in the air on that one, but it does go back to the point that with all the backup quarterbacks that we've seen make their way in, including Zach Wilson again, it seems inevitable the league's going to try to change a rule this offseason, make sure that doesn't happen, and that rule is going to negatively affect defensive players once again. So we need to all brace for impact on that, get ready to go, because like Richard said, offensive players can never have enough when it comes to some help on that side of the ball. Richard, we appreciate the time on a Monday morning, man. Thanks so much. Hope you guys have a great trip this week. Thursday night football, the Chargers at the Raiders this week should be a real spicy one considering the situation Brandon Staley and the Chargers are in right now.
Right. If they don't win that one, I mean, I would imagine there's some movement, but who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, who knows? Thanks, Richard. We appreciate the time, man.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, guys. Have a great day.
Yeah, Dad, it's going to get real uncomfortable there. But I guess finishing up, Dad, where we started, back where you were here, you're in Dallas still after that game. We talked about it some with Richard, where it seems like these teams are right now. Do you think Philly can fix this? Did you see anything in that game last night that actually felt hopeful relative to maybe the 49ers loss from a week ago?
Well, what they need to do is get that running game going again. And I thought early on they were giving it a shot and trying to get it going. They ended up having over 100 yards. They ended up a little under 5 yards a carry, but then the game started getting away from them where they had to go away from it. Week before against San Francisco, they only had 46 yards rushing in that one. And I do think it's a lot of this, not only on the defense, but offensively with Jaylen, as Richard talked about, that was a fourth down play he talked about to Devontae Smith that floated. Some of his passes on crossing routes, and when you're running crossing routes, the idea of that is to get the ball there, the receivers running, hit them in stride so they can get yards after the catch. And on more than a few of those, and I know Dallas was sending blitzes, and now listen, that's what Dan Quinn does, and they love to play man. I mean, they play the most man of anybody. But the ball was coming out like a little more lazy, was a little softer. So just as Richard said, and what we saw, the receivers had to wait on the ball a little bit. When you have to do that, you're giving a chance for the DB to be right there. Stephon Gilmore, by the way, had an excellent game, and they had great coverage anyway. But that part just seemed off. And the defense, I know they've had injuries to the secondary. I know they've had injuries to the linebacker position. But they are just getting burned down the field right now. And then when your three best players on offense, when you're driving and to try and get in the end zone, Jalen Hurts gets the ball stripped. A.J. Brown gets the ball stripped. Devontae Smith gets the ball stripped. Those are the three players on offense you caught on the most. And they were the ones that had bad turnovers at bad times against a team that's just better than them right now, and that just compounds it. And we haven't even mentioned the penalties that they got hit with as well. Dallas is just so on an arrow up right now and playing well.
I guess that's the thing that actually gives me hope is this Philly loss didn't feel as bad as the 49ers loss because it came on the backs of rampant turnovers by your best offensive players, because it involved so many penalties here. It didn't feel quite as damning as the 49ers loss in my mind. Dad, before we get to an entire Mic'd Up Monday devoted to a very angry group of Kansas City Chiefs players and coaches after the game and the call that really have sent their season into an interesting point right now, I did just want to finish up with this about the Philadelphia Eagles last night, because you mentioned how this loss felt being there in the stadium and seeing everything that went on. Watching it at home and kind of comparing it to the loss last week, I don't know about you, Dad, it did not feel to me as bad as the loss to the 49ers. They got dominated by the 49ers in that game. In this game against Dallas, with 3 fumbles lost in this game, which is atypical for them. They're a middle-of-the-pack team in the NFL in terms of turnover margin, in terms of turnovers lost. That was surprising. The penalties in this game, they're not nearly as bad as their Dallas counterpart across the field usually, who's one of the most penalized teams in football. The fact that it was their 3 best offensive weapons that turned the ball over at those critical junctures, and the things that did look healthier, right? Your defensive line looked back to being themselves, so much so that Fletcher Cox and Jalen Carter comboed on the only touchdown scored for the Eagles on the night. And then you look even the way they challenged Dak Prescott. According to Next Gen Stats, Dak threw into a tight window pass on a season-high 30.8% of attempts for 99 yards. It was the most tight window passing yards by a quarterback in a game this season. It wasn't like San Fran where they were running wide open. So I look at all those things, Dad, and say combine that with Dallas Goedert being back, and I could feel better about the Eagles going forward. Now, it's an easy portion of their schedule to finish off the season, and if they don't get their personnel figured out in the back end, they're going to lose in the postseason to these teams. But I still didn't feel as bad as I think I should, even though it's Dallas week.
Yeah, the problem, though, Mike, with the offense is they just can't get the ball in the end zone. I mean, they had a couple of good drives, and then they either stalled by the turnover or stalled by, Dallas's defense or their own issues, penalties against them. And it was field goals instead of touchdowns, and you kept waiting kind of for them to turn it around. They had a chance to get within 1 score before halftime, and they were going to get the ball, and that drive stalls, and they only get a field goal, and there's enough time on the clock for Dallas to go down, and they score a touchdown. So what could have been 17-10 ends up being 24-6 instead at halftime. Just too many mistakes on their part. I'm with you. They didn't get run like they did against San Francisco, but they were definitely the worst team last night. But you kept waiting for that one big play, like they got, when Fletcher Cox sacks and forces a fumble and Carter scoops it for the score. You were waiting for something like that on offense that just, unfortunately for Philly, never showed up.
Never showed up last night, so we'll see if it does down again. A much easier stretch for them. But it's time to get to the other big story from yesterday in Mic'd Up Monday. Jesse, we know we got a lot of Chiefs complaining that we need to digest.
Yeah, so Mic'd Up Monday presented by Wrangler. A little bit more actually today of Meltdown Monday for the Kansas City Chiefs. After that loss that came down to the wire there, it was not pretty on the podium.
It was a heck of a football game down to the end. Very disappointed that it ended the way it did. And normally I'll get, I never use any of this as excuses, but normally I get a warning before something like that happens in a big game. A bit embarrassing in the National Football League for that to take place. Normally, if it's even close, you get a warning. The head coach gets a warning. I mean, that normally. So I don't know. I didn't have a protractor out there, but it's a bit embarrassing.
That is as spicy as I feel like we've ever seen Andy Reid at the podium. Dad, you've known Andy for a long time, and obviously a guy that we're all familiar with coaching in big-time plays in the multiple spots of this league. How surprised were you he teed off like this?
Yeah, it was a little bit. Now, they might be getting sick of just kind of how they're mounting up. Remember the Marquez Valdes-Scantling interference against Green Bay that wasn't called late in the game. I mean, so I think it's been kind of adding up. But this one, I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out what he meant there. I mean, Kadarius Toney lined up offsides. I mean, it wasn't even close. Is Andy saying that the ref was supposed to tell Andy, hey, he's offsides? We don't know if Toney, as Richard Sherman said, did Toney look down at the ref? And if he did, ask if he was onside. He's owed that. If he didn't, that's on him. I mean, you've got to line up on sides. He was offside. So whatever Kansas City and Andy was looking for from the refs and didn't get, they seem to be pretty disgusted at the fact that they didn't get it when it was their own guy that lined up offsides. I mean, you know what? They sure as hell don't do it when a defensive lineman is lined up offsides. Nobody's looking over to the side and the ref saying, hey, Golic, back up a little bit. They're just, throwing the flag.
I do love the complete lack of empathy from defensive players on this one. Even though it's weird, I don't see nearly the advantage for an offensive player being lined up there because receivers have to go so far to be effective. But you are right, in a world where defensive players have so much taken from them, it's not all that surprising. And I'm with you, Dad. We spend a lot of time in football trying to find areas where rules that are clearly supposed to be called and being violated shouldn't be called for some reason. No one wanted to see it affect that play. The end of the play, all-time play, Travis Kelce catches the ball downfield, YOLOs it back to Kadarius Toney for what would have been the go-ahead score in another of horrific losses for the Buffalo Bills, giving up leads in the fourth quarter. And so that compounds it, so much so that you had Patrick Mahomes, who I think, Jesse, is going to be next up on our bites here, who was ticked off because he felt it affected the legacy of Travis Kelce.
Yeah, he was not pleased that, regardless how you feel about that play, that once again, we're talking about the refs.
It's obviously tough to swallow. Not only for me, but just for football in general. Just to take away greatness like that. For a guy like Travis to make a play like that, and who knows if we win. But as I know, as fans, you want to see the guys on the field decide the game. And that's why last week I didn't say anything about the flag that didn't get called on the Marquez. And so, they're human, man. They make mistakes, but it's every week we're talking about something, and that's elementary school. We talk about. You point to the ref, do all that different type of stuff, and it doesn't get called. And if it does, they warn you, and there was no warning throughout the entire game. And then you wait till there's a minute left in the game to make a call like that. It's tough, man. It's lost for words, man. It's tough because regardless if we win or lose, man, just for the end with another game and we're talking about the refs, man, it's just not what we want for the NFL and for football.
He wants to be talking about Travis Kelce's legendary career, not the refs. Guys, does it feel like we do, though, have an officiating problem in the NFL?
Well, we do, but it's the right message and the wrong messenger because, Dad, I think what we're seeing right now, if it hadn't already happened before, for a lot of people outside of Kansas City, is kind of the turn that happened when the Golden State Warriors started doing a little bit too much winning and liking it a little too much. People stopped feeling sorry for you. And for Patrick Mahomes, who has been the poster of positive PR since he stepped into the NFL, who hardly ever complains about this stuff, who hardly ever leverages the power he has as currently the best football player in our sport, this moment here was met with a lot of wham-whams and people mocking him for the way that he acted there, even though part of me does find it kind of endearing that he did this in a way that does divert attention away from one of his teammates. The rest of us are going to come for Kadarius Toney. A lot of people are going to criticize him, and Mahomes and Reed are doing a phenomenal job of running interference for a guy that's going to have a pretty rough Monday.
Plus, there's a difference of a subjective call in the Green Bay game of pass interference down the field and a dude lining up offsides. Listen, in my game last night on one of the brotherly shoves, Landon Dickerson, he lined up, his hand was in the neutral zone, and they got called for offside, and it was the right call.
That's because the ref's a hater.
He lined up offsides. If you're looking to get out of that, and I get it, you're warned sometimes, especially if you look over, the ref should help you out, but just like you did with Richard Sherman and me as defensive players, it blows your mind. We never get the benefit of the doubt. Never. And now you're looking for, you can't call that. Get a warning. Yeah, we broke the rules, but you shouldn't call it. Give me a friggin' break. Come on.
This is a broken Patrick Mahomes, though. This end of game broke him in a season where they've still fallen short of the standard, where the drops have been a problem and the penalties and all these things. He finally had to let out some frustration and is so wired to be a good teammate that he didn't want to do it to one of his guys. And so he took aim at the next closest person, the guy wearing the stripes next to him on the sideline, and decided to let all of it out in that moment.
GoJo and Golic. The Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes has come to a close with a $700 million deal with the Dodgers. And we can all agree, including the baseball is dead guys, that $700 million is a lot of money.
$700 million for Shohei Ohtani. He's a Dodger, Dallas.
Welcome to Hollywood.
Dodger.
Welcome to Hollywood. $700 million damn dollars. That is a bag. That's a bag's bag, baby. That is a king's ransom. $700 million. The Dodgers went out and just signed an entire franchise. They're like, yeah, you know what? The best part about this is all the numbers getting thrown around. I mean, there's so many different layers to this, but just on the surface, when you're like, well, dude, best pitchers in the game making 40 mil plus a year, right? Okay, all right. Best hitters in the game making 40 plus mil a year, right? Okay,
so he's
all
a
right.
steal.
So let's just what are we going to say? He's going to make $80 million a year? Huh? Really? And the Dodgers were like, you know what? Sounds good. Just sign the check. That sounds great.
That is some boy math, am I right?
The Dodgers are nation's premier boy mathematicians. Oh, it is a staggering amount of money. Like, I'm glad we got that reaction back because this all happened in the midst of a Saturday where we're just sitting around gearing up for the Army-Navy game. We got one college football game on to watch, some FCS postseason, and then wham, the most secret free agency that any of us can ever remember culminates in this one, Dad. An extension that is now the largest in baseball history by more than $250 million, walloping his former teammate Mike Trout's $426 million extension. It also topped the $450 million deal signed by Mahomes to become the biggest in North American pro sports. And Dad, his average annual salary of $70 million a year is going to be more than the 2023 opening day payrolls for the Baltimore Orioles and the Oakland Athletics. And I'll do you one further. The $700 million over the life of his deal is higher than the GDP of 6 countries. 6 countries he is now essentially worth more than on the life of this deal. It is even by our standards, we're so used to sports being this candy land of made up salaries and astronomical values, and this still smacked us all across the face.
And we thought, it was going to be a $600 million deal when he was going to hit and pitch. And then get the surgery. He's not pitching at all next year. He's only batting, and we thought, that could knock it down in the $500 million range. He's going to have to get by on that. And it ends up being $700 million. And listen, we both love Jeff Passan, who loves baseball and talks baseball. Jeff Passan started describing how it wasn't really a $700 million deal, the way it's structured with tax for teams. And I stopped reading. I'm like, Shohei's getting $700 million. That's all that matters to me. I don't care how it deals with the Dodgers. He's getting $700 million. So you know what I like to do, Mike? I like to do my math as well. There's 162 games. If he plays in every game at $70 million, every game day he would be making $432,000. He batted 497 times last year. If he were to do that again, every single time he steps to the plate, he would make $140,000 every time he stepped to the plate. It is stunning. And again, it goes to show what baseball and what sports are making that you can pay these guys. Because the one thing we know, and while owners will cry about it, they ain't losing money. You see what they bought these franchises for and what they'd sell them for and how much they have appreciated over the years and what they can make.
So you're absolutely right about that. I am interested, though, Dad, what you think, because I saw a lot of people complaining about the other side of this, which is given all the money that's out there for certain franchises, how this looks, where so far you've got the 2 biggest moves of the offseason, Juan Soto going to the Yankees, and then the biggest free agent prize there was in Shohei Ohtani going to the Dodgers. This idea that once again, the biggest money makers and the biggest spenders in the sport are the ones that are just bundling together all of this talent. And if that's a net negative for everybody else, because I saw a lot of other people sort of bemoaning the fact that Shohei Ohtani now ends up with the Dodgers, surprise, surprise. I look at it, Dad, and say, for me, as someone who's not a fan of one specific team, this is all's well that ends well to get him away from an Angels franchise that under their current ownership was not going to get him to the postseason. And baseball deserves to see Shohei Ohtani playing postseason baseball. They deserve one of the stars from that Angels team to have a chance to be in a place where more people are going to see them. But I can understand the frustration from others who look at the way the sport is structured and say that this is just for the rich to get richer.
Well, don't blame the team, blame the game, right? Because in the NFL, you have a hard salary cap that you can't go over. There's no like luxury cap, where in basketball, there's that cap, but if you go over, you can pay a luxury tax. And if an owner has a lot of money and wants to pay it, they'll go over it. Baseball, nobody has the hard cap like football, where it's even across the board, where there's a floor and there's a ceiling, and you have to stick to both. Baseball doesn't have that. So the game, what they've negotiated and what they're working on with their negotiations between teams and players is they don't have to deal with that. So, hey, more power. If you got the money and want to spend it, if there's a tax and you want to spend it like there is in basketball, then you'll spend it. So you kind of lose me with that argument when this is how the rules are set up. The Dodgers aren't doing anything wrong. The Yankees aren't doing anything wrong. Any team with money isn't doing anything wrong because you're allowed to spend it, and they are.
Well, I guess I'm more looking at fans looking at baseball because I do believe they're one of the only sports without a salary floor, too, a required amount that you have to spend in order to be up there. And so if I'm a fan looking at that, and especially a fan of a bad team in an era where, listen, post-A's, we know Moneyball is always the word that's going to get thrown around. But I do imagine there's some frustration that, even though, Dad, the other counter to this is baseball's a sport that rewards randomness and where one player's effect is probably as least felt as any in the major sports that we have in North America, where even if you've got a two-way star like Shohei Ohtani, the outcome and the results can only be so much because of the way the sport is structured. I do want to briefly, Dad, pour one out before we get too far away from this for Toronto Blue Jays fans.
Oh, my
God. Are
gosh.
y'all okay right now? Because we saw the report. John Morosi on Friday or Saturday was the reporter that tweeted out that Shohei Ohtani was en route to Toronto. It began a whole day's worth of flight tracking that felt very college football coaching search-esque, Dad. And it ended with John Morosi having to post an apology, and I'd imagine go into hiding right now because of the way that he got Blue Jays fans all hot and bothered, thinking they were going to be the ones to land the prize.
Yeah, and it turned out to be one of the guys from Shark Tank, Herjavec, I think is how you pronounce his last name. It was him on the private plane going to Toronto that was mistaken by this gentleman for Shohei going to Toronto, which just set off bets, set off everything for Toronto. And I get it, because you're right. This is what we see with the college coaches. And, Coach X is en route to X team. We've got the flight pattern of the private jet. So you get it, because we can do that nowadays. But to get it wrong on who the passenger was on such a big deal is just stunning. That is a big-time error. That, by the way, because of bets that were made for Toronto then to do what they were going to do, cost the people some money.
I just can't imagine that dark, lonely feeling when it started to crystallize for him that, oh my God, I've made a mistake. And listen, for everyone else seeing that, we were all kind of thinking the same thing, which is, all right, we really want Shohei out of there, but Toronto, like, damn. So this definitely, the end result to the Dodgers felt a little bit more box office. I feel for you Blue Jays fans. It probably would have been fun if he was up there for you guys too. But instead this morning, while the rest of the baseball world, I don't know if everyone's celebrating. I think there is a lot of, all right, at least we got our large Japanese son out of that situation. For Toronto Blue Jays fans, there can only be sadness. So thoughts and prayers to you guys. Go ahead and ice up this morning and hope you all feel better. But when we go from one prize to another, we mentioned this news broke on what was supposed to be one of the last college football Saturdays of the season. We also got some Heisman news yesterday, so let's celebrate Jayden Daniels, the LSU quarterback, for taking home the prized award in college football next year on GoJo and Golic. Welcome back to GoJo and Golic, and a hearty congratulations, Dad. We had hardware handed out in college football this weekend, the college football awards that went on earlier that culminated the Heisman Trophy Saturday night, going to, as expected, LSU quarterback Jayden Daniels. Dad, he finishes first in the voting, just ahead of Michael Penix Jr., followed by Bo Nix, and then Marvin Harrison Jr., the other three, I should say, that were all invited to New York for the final ceremony here. So, Dad, no real surprise on this one, right? Jayden Daniels, I know you didn't have a vote in this process like me, but if you did, I'd imagine it would have gone to the LSU quarterback.
Yeah, I had talked a lot about, or we had discussed that, how much would the Penix, Bo Nix, Washington, Oregon matchup right before the voting have to be and go into this? Because when you look at their passing numbers, they're all pretty close. One leads in one, but the others aren't far behind, depending on yards, depending on touchdowns. But then you throw in his 1,100 yards on the ground and more double-digit touchdowns and rushing as well, and just what he meant to that team. Remember going back remember he was at Arizona State and played as a freshman and then transferred. And remember the players, they were throwing stuff out of his locker, the ASU, his former teammates, saying this guy's trash anyway. And I saw a split shot of the players doing that and then of him holding the Heisman Trophy, saying he might have got the last laugh on this one, winning the Heisman Trophy. But what a talent he is. It will be interesting to see how that goes to the next level in an era in the NFL where that dual threat quarterback is such a big, big thing, because still we talk about his ability to run. Just about all his passing touchdowns were from the pocket. And we always talk about, even if you can run and move around, you got to be able to throw from the pocket. And that's where a high percentage of his touchdowns were from. So what it seems like a pretty banner year, at least that's always what we say for quarterbacks coming out. We're all ready to rip the group that already went to the NFL and bring in the next group and say, oh my God, how highly rated is Williams, is May, is Daniels. Shedeur Sanders, I think, is going to go back, and other quarterbacks that are coming out. But what a magical year he had. Are you allowed now to say who you voted for? Or so what was your voting?
Yeah, I put it out right after. For anyone unaware, I inexplicably have a Heisman vote. I am forever thankful to the Heisman Trust for some reason giving me a chance to influence this process. I had Jayden Daniels as my number one vote. You get 3 votes on there. I went Daniels, and then Bo Nix for my second place vote, and Michael Penix Jr. for the third place vote. And Dad, I got a lot of pushback, understandably, from passionate Washington fans who wanted to argue on behalf of Michael Penix Jr., who is in the college football playoff, the only one of these 4 to be in that case, and also won the head-to-head matchups that he had against Bo Nix's Oregon teams, which I get. This would be my reminder to people: the quarterbacks do not play each other in those matchups. Washington beat Oregon twice. Michael Penix Jr. didn't beat Bo Nix twice. And while he had great plays in both games, you can look back in the first game and think, for the most part, Oregon at certain junctures, especially offensively, was able to do what they wanted. On the season, you mentioned some of the numbers there. While Michael Penix Jr. led the whole group in passing yards there, it wasn't by much. Bo Nix finished the season with 4,145 yards. Michael Penix Jr. 4,218. Bo Nix 77% completion percentage to Michael Penix Jr.'s 65.9. And Bo Nix accounted for 40 touchdowns and just 3 interceptions on the season. And that's just through the air. 6 rushing touchdowns, too. And when I watched the game, Dad, the way I looked at a lot of this was, how much does your team benefit from everything you do? How much are you helping the rest of your group out there? A Heisman Trophy winner, an MVP to me, is supposed to make life easier for their teammates. And when you look at Bo Nix, and part of this I will always say is a bias that skews towards more mobile players, what he did getting out of sacks for that group. That's a good offensive line in front of him. Both him and Michael Penix Jr. had good lines in front of them. What Bo Nix Jr. did getting his way out of harm's way, only 5 sacks given up on the year. Part of that's a quarterback stat. What he did pushing the ball down down the field, especially on plays that were breaking script. All of that to me lended it to a guy that just slightly, I mean, these are two incredible players. Both of them are great and in different ways. I just thought at the end of the day, when I watched Oregon, I looked a little bit more at Bo Nix and a little bit less at the eye candy around him, as opposed to a Washington team that shouldn't be penalized for having a ton of resources, especially in that receiver room. But when it comes down to the voting in this award and how close it was, those are the kind of things to me that edge out.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, LSU, they themselves had 2,000-yard receivers. And, with Malik Neighbors being at the top of the twosome there, incredible. So, he had some good targets to throw to. Neighbors is going to be a high draft pick as well. I could see that. Let me put it this way. If Penix or Nix won it, I don't know. I wouldn't sit here and say, oh, my God, what an egregious thing that happened. But I certainly understand why Jayden Daniels did win this thing. I get it. If you look at the top 10, the first non-quarterback that showed up was the guy in New York, Marvin Harrison Jr. He was fourth. Fifth was Jordan Travis, the quarterback from Florida State. Then Jalen Milroe from Alabama. Then Ali Gordon from Oklahoma State, a running back, was there. And then, who was it? Cody Schrader, the running back from Missouri, was there. And then you finished up with a running back, Blake Corum from Michigan, and then the quarterback from Michigan, J.J. McCarthy. So that's how the top 10 went in this one. But to me, I think the most loaded, we could talk about the players there. To me, the best depth at an award, and I wonder if you would agree, was the Biletnikoff, where Neighbors from LSU, Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State, and Odunze from Washington were the three finalists. I don't know in another award that was given out if there was as much power, even at the Heisman and the quarterback position, than that position right there of those three guys.
You're talking about three, because I think it's interesting you brought up the pro prospects of a lot of these guys. That Biletnikoff finalist group could all be first-round wide receivers. They are exceptional. Oh, yes. They're all very different players there. Because I agree with you, that is absolutely, in my mind, the best depth for an award. Maybe you could go to something like the Outland, where you had Liatu Latu win the award out of UCLA. You had Joe Alt nominated, guys that'll be first-rounders. But, Dad, you compare it to the Heisman itself, and I think an interesting thing happened in college football this season, because Jayden Daniels, sensational, but the Heisman winner being on a team that had 3 losses is something we're not as used to lately. Usually it is best player on one of the playoff teams, but this year it didn't necessarily shake out like that for us. And I think a funny thing happened when Caleb Williams started to, or I shouldn't say Caleb Williams started to underperform, when USC started to underperform, and we had to talk about Caleb Williams in a different light, is we sped up to draft season a little bit. And the one thing that I've seen kind of crystallize now is, at least at this point, it feels like when it comes to the quarterbacks, even though we had all this depth and all this experience in college football's quarterbacking this year, it seems like it is very clear Caleb Williams and Drake May are going to be first-round quarterbacks, and I'm not sure if any of the rest of these guys would be if we did the draft tomorrow. We might do what we always do and talk ourselves into a couple of them, but if you're asking me to say what quarterbacks would you for sure take in the first round, it would be those two, and then the answers would probably stop.
I'm going to tell you right now, Mike, I'd put the over-under at 3.5 quarterbacks taken in the first round. I'd take the over, because you know what teams do. Teams always reach. I think there's going to be 3, and I'll say 4 quarterbacks taken in the first round. Drake May's name just stopped being talked about, right? I mean, we talked about how Caleb Williams and USC started going downhill, and Drake May and his team in North Carolina, we just basically stopped talking about, because we had Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. doing what they were doing, and Drake May just going about his business, because he is going to be the second quarterback taken. And then there was a lot of talk also about Shedeur Sanders. Still, we don't know if he's coming back or not. Again, I think he is, but with how well he had been playing outside of getting beat up in the pocket as well, I'll put it at, I think 4. I think 4 of these quarterbacks are going to go in the first round in the draft.
I will be very interested. I don't think so. And I think after Kenny Pickett's draft class and seeing a lot of the names that we loved in college and thought were really productive quarterbacks and the way the NFL clearly viewed them, you can look at Will Levis last year and the roller coaster of emotions we went to leading up to the draft for him, albeit he wasn't nearly as productive as either Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. And Penix runs an NFL offense. There's all these things that certainly lend themselves to that, but I think it's going to be a long way to go from now until the draft. Coming up next, though, let's get back to the NFL and talk about maybe the most impactful game of the weekend next. GoJo and Golic. It is brought to you by Wrangler, made for the ride of life. Save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order with promo code GoJo15. So we are going to continue our look back at Week 14 now, fellas. A little recap here. So let's start with a hella good one in the Rams-Ravens. This was enjoyable to watch. Yeah, this was... I would say, as we recap it now, we were looking back and talking about this during the break. You had the drama at the end of Kansas City, Buffalo. You certainly had the history and the in-division aspect of the rivalry between the Eagles and Cowboys. Dad, the best played game of the weekend was the Los Angeles Rams against the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens win in overtime on a walk-off punt return touchdown to continue to solidify their place as one of the top teams in the AFC. But, Dad, I don't know about you. The Ravens won this game, and I came away looking at the Los Angeles Rams, going back to what I said earlier in the season, before we dealt with the stretch without Matthew Stafford due to injury. That Rams team, when healthy, plays like a playoff team and would absolutely qualify, as we did some of the delineations last week, as a team nobody wants to see right now.
Yeah, and they're just right on the outside looking in. If you look at the playoff picture now, the seventh slot is Green Bay, which is 6-6, and they play the Giants tonight. And then on the outside looking in are the Rams at 6 and 7, and Seattle and Atlanta and New Orleans all at 6 and 7. So while we have a lot of 7 and 6 in the AFC, we've got a lot of 6 and 7 in the NFC. But you're right. It's a team with the talent that they have and have added, and what they've got out of those rookies like Puka Nacua. It has been really impressive for them. But the Ravens, we had the walk-off punt return in overtime by the Jets, I think it was in week 1, right? So to see that, Tylan Wallace doing that 76-yard punt return, little spin move as well in there, was now
called
Baltimore
back due to a block in the back, by the way, too. There was a very clear block in the back on that play. Rule of cool, I'm glad it stood, but there absolutely was a penalty on that play, and if I was a Rams fan, I would absolutely be hot about that walking into work today.
Baltimore sitting as the top seed right now in the AFC. Now they're 10 and 3. Miami is next at 9 and 3, and they play Tennessee tonight with 2 games on Monday Night Football. We got a twofer, which is very cool. But I agree with you. Both teams over 400 yards of total offense. One quarterback over 300 in Lamar. The other in Stafford just under that. Kyron Williams, another big game, running the ball for the Rams. I'm with you. I mean, the Rams literally could sneak into the playoffs, but they are one of those teams that, if they don't, could knock another team at the bottom rung there of the playoffs out of the playoffs as well. Where Baltimore, as we were talking about with Richard Sherman, we're trying to figure out who the team is in the AFC, right? I mean, it's not Kansas City. And Miami, we're waiting for to beat a good team, and they're playing Tennessee tonight. So even if Miami wins tonight, we're still not going to anoint them, right? Because Tennessee's not a winning team, so we're going to hold off on that. We've seen what Casey has done. We see what Jacksonville has done. Those are all your division leaders right now. So it almost seems like by default, and I don't want to say by default necessarily because they are playing well, but Baltimore seems to be the most complete team right now.
I would say yesterday was the first time I felt like that Baltimore team, I could look at them and say, that looks like the best team in the AFC. And really, it was in the second half of this game, because this was like a prize fight, and that both teams, it felt like, were jabbing early on, right? You had some weird play calling by Sean McVay, who starts off the game with 9 straight runs and then gets into the red zone and decides that he's allergic to running the football and is just going to pass his way to field goals. That happens a few times. You've got some mismanagement with the clock by John Harbaugh at the end of the first half. The bad challenge at the end of the game. Like, there was still some clunky stuff in there from a coaching perspective on both sides that made me scratch my head, where these two teams would randomly abandon a really productive run game for both sides. But what ended up with, Dad, was the players making plays. This might have been, pound for pound, in the second half, the best quarterback game I've watched collectively the entire season, with the way that Matthew Stafford and Lamar Jackson were playing at the end of that game. That was MVP stuff from Lamar Jackson. The way he navigated the pocket in this game, and has for a lot of this season, is to me one of the biggest areas of growth and the biggest signs that he is one of the best quarterbacks in football. He never looked phased with the pocket breaking down around him. On that final drive in regulation where he goes down there and helped them score, between the touchdown and then the 2-point conversion, he was seeing zeros and ones in the matrix. That was some elite quarterback play. And Stafford on the other side was nobody's second place there with some of the stuff he did since coming back from injury. He's looked like vintage Stafford. He's looked like the guy that Los Angeles shelled out the resources to go and grab and get out of the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, where that swap of quarterbacks, Jared Goff is starting, unfortunately, to revert to look more like the quarterback that he was with the Rams. As far as Lamar, and Baltimore's a team that they get to the playoffs and then lose, and then sometimes they don't even have Lamar, because he's been injured. So if you're a Ravens fan, every time you kind of see him run, or he's been hurt from the pocket the last time he got hurt, is to make sure he's standing after every play. But I'll say this, Mike. NFL athletes, some of the greatest athletes in the world. Lamar Jackson is even above those guys. Watching him move, watching him just glide, shuffle, move, get out of trouble, juke people, like he's almost not even trying. I just sat there amazed watching him. He is almost effortless in his ability to get away from people and make something happen. And let me tell you, as a former defensive player, and by the way, not a great pass rusher either, what a damning thing if you get there and you're by him and you get a good rush, and yet you still can't bring him down. If you ever spy him, to me, it's a waste of time because he's going to beat that guy in the open field like he beats everybody else. He is a lot of fun to watch, and it's almost like jaw-dropping to me of watching him saying, wait, these are some of the greatest athletes on earth, and he is just making them look silly at times.
He's at the point now where experience has now caught up to his ability. He's so in control of everything because you're right, Dad. It used to be he was embarrassing some of the best athletes in pro football in the open field. He'd break the pocket and you'd strap in and get ready for the highlight you were going to see on SportsCenter. And now I feel like every time he breaks contain, he does what we ask quarterbacks to do, is still be looking to push downfield.
Right.
His eyes are always up when he's moving around in the pocket. He would always rather do that. And he's always looking, like you said, to make sure, hey, I just don't want to take the big hit in the open field. I'm going to get the yards that are there, and then I'm going to protect myself once we get there. He still did that to the tune of being the team's leading rusher in this game. Keaton Mitchell, 9 for 54 outside of that as he continues to get most of the carries in that running back room there. But, Dad, I think for Lamar Jackson, too, that kind of takeover was important for everyone to kind of get to see on that stage, just because this offense, you can clearly see, is still sort of working through who they are in life without Mark Andrews. Like I talked with Mina about this on her podcast last week. Would we see them do more 3 wide receiver sets and less 2 tight end sets in this game? And through the first half, we still saw a lot of Isaiah Likely and Patrick Ricard out there as the remaining tight ends there. They got their third string guy, forget the guy's name, out of Iowa State, but they still had a lot of multiple tight end sets on the field. They were still operating a lot of their business out of that. And then when it got to nut cutting time down the stretch of this game, they got into the 3 wide receiver stuff. Odell Beckham Jr. had another one of his really productive games for the Ravens in that uniform. Zay Flowers had a couple of big plays down the stretch. And because Lamar Jackson is so capable, when push comes to shove, working out and operating out of the pocket like that, I think you saw, all right, an offense that we have been waiting to consistently develop downfield got some great reps in some really clutch moments that they're going to be able to use to build on, since they will not have Mark Andrews for the duration.
Charlie Kohler was the other tight end who were thinking about. That's the big guy from Iowa State. But you look at the game yesterday, Zay Flowers and Odell both targeted 10 times and Likely 7 times. So that's the triumphant right now. Right now that Mark Andrews is out. Aguilar is coming up with some catches. He had 5 yesterday on 5 targets. You know, the former, let's call it what it was. He was a bust in Philadelphia, getting new life here in Baltimore and more opportunities, since Andrews was always that go-to guy of just being outside the top 3 they throw to now, but still a guy that they can try and count on more and more. And as we said, this is the most weapons that Lamar has had. They actually went out and got some. And then the old faithful Mark Andrews, the one that's always been there, unfortunately is the one that ends up getting hurt. But you got to like what's going on with them right now, without a doubt, especially in an AFC that's in flux. They seem to be the most consistent now.
Yeah, I would say we can say I feel comfortable saying they are clearly the best team in the AFC now.
I do
based
too.
on what we've seen from everybody else, that finally feels like Baltimore has put a little bit of distance between themselves and everyone else now. And that's also because I think this Rams team is a lot better than a 6-6 win. Like, people might look at this and say, you beat a 500 Rams team. That was a team that, when they missed Kyren Williams and when they were without Matthew Stafford, obviously had a bad time. But with them healthy, Dad, I do not want to minimize this. I still really hope we get to see this Rams team find their way into the postseason, because they have added an inside run element to their team this year. Kyren Williams is a big part of that, but that offensive line, now that it's not marred by crazy injury, is certainly a part of that. The defense has some really good young playmakers like Jones, the linebacker, to go along with Aaron Donald and company. But, man, Matthew Stafford, still on his best day, looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL with some of the stuff, especially that connection with him and Cooper Kupp and what they're able to put down. So I think that was a really, really quality win for the Baltimore Ravens in some sloppy circumstances. It did not look like a clean track out there in Baltimore, but they found a way. That defense got its nose bloodied a little bit. One of the top defenses in the NFL, really good rush defense. Dad, you saw, for all the space alien stuff they do with the sim pressures and showing going, and will they, won't they in terms of the blitzers. One of the easy solutions to that, and we've talked about this for a while, is if you're able to just go and churn out yards early in downs and not get them into advantage down and distances, you can really mitigate some of the effect of that by letting your big guys lean on the little guys that are around the line of scrimmage. And the Rams did put a lot of that on display. That's not replicable for everyone because you got to have the personnel to do it, but at the very least, it's the first thing we've looked at and said is, wow, had consistent success against that Baltimore defense.
And as we talked about, they're just on the outside looking into the playoffs, but could they be the thorn in somebody's side? They have 4 games left, only 2 that could affect a getting into playoffs and or maybe a seed. They play the Commanders, so nothing there. Then they play the Saints, where everybody has a losing record, but everybody's still in play to win the NFC South. Then they play the Giants, nothing there. And then they finish with the 49ers. And the 49ers certainly could be playing for the number 1 seed in the NFC, and the Rams could have a say in that. And then you go to Baltimore right now, sitting at the number 1 seed, big game. And they have some big games coming up. They play Jacksonville, which obviously lost yesterday, but we know they can play well. We've seen it at times. Then they play the 49ers. Big matchup there. Some at this point may say preview to the Super Bowl, possibly. Then a big one for them. They play Miami. And by then, we'll see what the record's now. But right now, those 2 would be fighting for the number 1 seed in the AFC. And that would be the head-to-head matchup that could decide it before Baltimore finishes up with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So just, under a handful of games to go. And could it still get very, very interesting.
So those are higher order problems. Those are 1 seed problems that we're talking about here. Dad, you mentioned one of the teams I want to talk about, Jesse. We have lumped in the Lions and the Jags kind of in the same bucket, and not a banner weekend for either in terms of what we think they're capable of on the top end.
Yeah, we had some teams with some bad losses. Like you mentioned, Jags, Lions, Texans also going down. So how are we feeling about these teams today? And earmuffs, Emerson. Are the Jags frauds, you guys?
Ooh,
Dad,
wow.
So the Jags and the Lions, I won't go as far as to say fraudulent, right? Because you can look at reasons why both happen. But that being, you and I talked about this last week with the Lions. I think we do need to have a serious conversation about the expectations for this team and whittle it back to, hey, if you win your division and get to the playoffs this year, that's a win, because we've clearly seen this defense is still not built to party in the way it needs to. Justin Fields had all the time in the world to work in the pocket yesterday for the Chicago Bears. He played a really good game. That Chicago Bears offensive line has gotten a lot better. That defense has showed signs of improvement in recent weeks. But this Detroit Lions defense, for all the changes they made this offseason and some of the things they've tried to do, really hasn't netted them anything when it's mattered most down the stretch.
And listen, we talked such arrow up to them and for a while put them in the upper echelon of the NFC. Now, a bit of a fight that's going to be going on as they sit there leading the division, obviously, with 9 wins, but, not far off. Minnesota is 7-6, after they get that devastating 3-0 win, which, oh my God, thank God we won't talk about that game. But think about what the Lions have coming up. I'm calling their game this Saturday against Denver, and Denver is playing some ball. By the way, objects in the rearview mirror are closer than they appear, Kansas City. Denver is a game back from you, so I'm looking forward to calling that one. And then their last 3 games, they play the Vikings twice, and sandwiched in there is the Cowboys. So, the Lions, for what we thought and where they could end up, is going to be real interesting. And then I'm with you about Jacksonville. I just don't have a lot of faith in the way they're playing right now as well. They're going to win that division. But from where, and it's always like they got to the playoffs last year, you look to take the next step. I don't think they're going to take that step this year.
I will say this. All of that happening with Jacksonville yesterday with the backdrop of what we saw happen with Trevor Lawrence the week before, I was amazed by how well he was moving out there. Like, I don't know if maybe he just overreacted initially to the injury or if the guy's made of adamantium or titanium or whatever. But, Dad, he did not look like he had trouble moving around there. He had trouble not giving the ball to the other team. That was a little bit of an issue during the course of that game. But on the other side, how about pretty boy Joe Flacco? Joe Flacco now has started 2 games for the Cleveland Browns. And in that time, Dad, he has more 300-yard passing games, 1, and the same amount of 3 touchdown passing games, 1, as Deshaun Watson has had in his entire Browns tenure so far here. Like, we've talked about all the signs that Deshaun just may not get back to being the dude at all. Joe Flacco coming off the couch and being able to do that at the helm of the Browns offense in his second game back should be a bit of a wake-up call if there wasn't already one for that organization and the bad decision they made.
First on Jacksonville, sitting at 8-5, and in the playoffs right now as a team in their division is Indy at 7-6, so they're just a game behind. But Jacksonville swept the Colts during the regular season, so that gives them a healthy lead there as Jacksonville finishes up with Baltimore. And then 3 games, Tampa Bay, the Panthers, and the Titans. They should be able to get by those, but I just don't have a lot of faith going into the playoffs where Cleveland right now, I'm with you. Flacco, 300-yarder, a guy who's a statue in the pocket, playing well, and Njoku had a big game, and I had him on my fantasy team, so I was happy about that. We know how good that defense is. But think about the AFC, Mike. Cleveland right now is the first slot in the wild card at 8-5. Then Pittsburgh, Indy, Houston, Denver, Cincinnati, Buffalo, all 7-6, all 1 game behind that. So a whole lot still to be determined from the wild card slot in the AFC.
We tried to bury a lot of the AFC North, and I still think the Steelers, it's going to be an uphill battle. No Kenny Pickett. We clearly saw this Mitch Trubisky situation because of how turnover prone he is can be a real problem. But the Bengals won a game yesterday convincingly against a team in the Colts right now that's in the playoff where A.J. McCarron in 2023 had to throw a pass in the NFL. Like the Bengals, who had Jake Browning start this game and A.J. McCarron have to come in this game, won the game by 20 points. So clearly not going away are the Bengals. But Dad, you mentioned it, all of that leads me back to the Buffalo Bills. Like, what an opportunity here for this Bills team that got a big-time win in Kansas City. Every team in front of them that you mentioned, there are 5 teams at 7-6. 2 of them are in the playoffs. All of them own a tiebreaker right now over the Buffalo Bills. So they've got work to do and really no margin for error down the stretch of this season, but they are capable. Like, that is the one thing that we have said about Buffalo is as long as they're not turning the ball over, Joe Brady has tweaked some things with the play calling, James Cook in the passing game, clearly a directive. Them doing more on the ground, period, clearly a directive, including rushing Josh Allen. These things that we've been asking for from the offense that showed up, they are absolutely in the hunt right now. We go back to that designation. Is this Buffalo Bills team given the meat grinder of teams with inexplicable quarterback situations ahead of them?
Yeah, definitely can jump in. They have the tough game this week with the Cowboys. The Cowboys hit a couple of tough games in a row, but they have the Cowboys. Then the Chargers and Patriots should obviously get by that. And they finish up with Miami. And they're 3 games back of Miami. I don't see them catching Miami, but we're just talking about get in, right? You don't care at this point if it's a wild card. Get in the playoffs. And if you're hitting your stride by that point, good things can happen.
This is another one of those years where I wish that we could trade for someone, anyone from either conference to represent instead of the NFC South. Because while the Buccaneers and the Falcons may have played the best bad football game ever yesterday, we saw on the other side that Panthers-Saints matchup. Nobody should make the postseason from that division. Somebody will, and that's going to be a very sad day for everybody involved.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. We got 2 Monday Night Football games coming your way this evening, and good luck watching them both because they both kick off at the same time. So let's start with Titans-Dolphins, guys. Do you like the Dolphins to keep up with the Ravens for that top seed in the AFC? What do we think?
Dad, I would say yes. Like, this looks like a matchup where really tonight both favorites should win in this game. The one thing you can say is historically the Tennessee Titans do the things that would bother the Dolphins, meaning have a 4-man rush and a group up front in the D-line that could maybe try and muck up some of the gears here. But we've seen this Dolphins offensive line lately look a little bit better. Saw Austin Jackson get the payday the other day, a little extension for him indicative of some progress that he's made. So I would still expect Miami to get things done here. And really now, it is about that case for the 1 seed, right? They started off this week, or going into this weekend as the 1 seed in the AFC, and are now going to be in the hunt battling back and forth with the Ravens from here on out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you know, you're playing the Ravens, so that could be the game, but you got to stay even until then. I guess my thought on this, Mike, Miami and Tennessee, what's Tennessee's record? It's 4-8. Miami wins. That's what they do. They beat the under 500 teams. That's been their kind of their way. So I would be stunned if but either of the favorites lost. Green Bay is playing they're on a roll right now. Jordan Love is playing well. The Giants, could they sneak up on you? Could Tommy DeVito do his thing, you know, and keep it going? We'll have to wait and see. But I like the favorites in both of this game. I mean, Green Bay hanging on to that last slot right now, and they're in the 7th slot of the NFC, sitting at 6-6, and then all the 6 and 7 teams right on the outside: the Rams, the Seahawks, Atlanta, and New Orleans. So they're all right there. So this is one of those where toward the end of the season, you need to be hitting your stride before the playoffs. And B, this is the time to hold off those teams behind you and win those games you should win. December is not the time you want the what ifs. In the offseason, when you don't make it and you look back and you go, what if? You know, right in the beginning of December, we don't give that game up to a 4-8 Giants team. So what ifs are horrible at any time of the year, but when you're playing well, more's on the line in December, and you give one up to a team you should beat, that will really eat away at you.
I think for the Miami Dolphins in that case, who are in the same boat, no doubt, against this Titans team, you can feel pretty good on a couple of fronts. One, Jeffrey Simmons, star defensive tackle for the Tennessee Titans, not going to be playing in this game because of a knee injury. He is a huge part of the force for all the good stuff that happens up front for them. An absolute maniac. And on the other side, Dad, Will Levis has, I think, started to level out a little bit more. He had the incredibly hot start, the multi-touchdown pass game with DeAndre Hopkins, and then since then has looked more like the guy we saw in college, where there's flashes of really great stuff and then a little bit of inconsistency. Some of it is also the world around him. He was sacked 6 times by the Colts last week and is now going up against Dolphins team that's 3rd in the NFL with 41 sacks, and I'm sure Vic Fangio is going to relish the opportunity to try and make a rookie quarterback's life a bit of a bad time in this game. You would expect them to lean heavy on the run game in this game and try and really go downhill with that with Derrick Henry, because that's probably about the one area we've seen this Dolphins defense be truly vulnerable.
Yeah, Packers on a 3-game roll right now. One of the hotter teams now in the NFL. Jordan Love playing well. Let me ask you this. Do you think at this point Detroit loses a division?
I think there's too much distance between them now, just because, I mean, we're talking, so Green Bay is 6-6 right now. You've got the Vikings behind them at 7-6, and then Detroit would, I think it's not enough runway left for me to buy that right now. Detroit also, and I thought this was an interesting note for them, Dad, and something that I don't know if Dan Campbell would feel great about people even referencing this with his team. That was the last outdoor game that the Lions are going to play until they get to the postseason yesterday. And while I'm sure they don't want to admit it, that might be a little bit more of a dome team that we've let on, especially with Jared Goff and some of his proclivities coming over from the past as we talk about his ceiling kind of being a limiting factor. So I think the Lions aren't going to lose out to the end here. And I don't think Minnesota's in a position to really challenge them being a little bit ahead. And even Green Bay, I think while they definitely are playing the best football right now currently in that division, I don't know if it's going to be enough to catch the Lions.
Yeah, and Green Bay and the Lions split during the regular season. And why Minnesota could is because Minnesota still plays the Lions twice. And the Lions are 2 games ahead of them in the loss column. So if they somehow swept the Lions, and we'll see if maybe the Lions will give up another game. I mean, it's the way they're playing right now, Mike, it's a possibility. Like I said, I'm calling their game Saturday. They play the Broncos. And the Broncos are playing some great ball right now. And then the Vikings, then the Cowboys, and then the Vikings again. I mean, I think there is a real possibility the way Detroit's playing right now, they could slip and lose that division lead.
The thing I'll say is I worry about the Vikings' ability to hold up their end of the bargain, specifically because we got to wait to see what the status is on Justin Jefferson. Every Vikings fan's worst nightmare yesterday. You get Justin Jefferson back off the hamstring injury, and then about a quarter into that game, he goes down with, I think, what's being called a chest injury right now.
Yes,
that they're going to be checking on there. And so you combine that with the fact that the quarterback situation, we saw Josh Dobbs back out there under center for that team. They end up making a switch in the fourth quarter of that game to try and jumpstart it a little bit. And so clearly the air has kind of been let out of the balloon in the quarterback situation there, Dad. And now that they might not get their best weapon on the team back on offense, I just don't know if there's going to be enough Brian Flores bridges and all the blitzes and all the world to be able to overcome that when push comes to shove. And again, you're not dealing with the elements in either of those games for the Vikings or the Lions, and so maybe that Lions offense can get back on track enough to offset a defense that's given up the goods.
So it may not be the Lions. Well, the Lions would win that division, but it would be that the competition they have just isn't enough in that division. Especially, I'm with you at Minnesota in the quarterback position on what's going to go on there. The thrill was Dobbs, could he get back what he had thrown to Justin Jefferson? And as you mentioned, all of a sudden Jefferson's hurt with a different injury now. So, man, you just got to wonder. A little snake bit right now is Minnesota, even though they have those chances 2 of the last 3 games.
Yep, and so Minnesota and Green Bay currently sitting in the wild card right now. Dad, I am forming a prayer circle. No offense to the Vikings. I don't want to treat this like the College Football Playoff Committee and what they did to Florida State. But at the same time, we've kind of seen who you are right now, and we kind of see what the Los Angeles Rams are doing, reprising the role of Alabama. And I would really like to see the Rams in the NFC postseason instead of the Minnesota Vikings at this point, knowing what each team's capable. Because, again, it's kind of the same formula where you've got the same quarterback there in Matthew Stafford. He actually was injured, but they're playing some real really compelling football right now, if they're able to string together a few like this, they're absolutely going to be a team that most people, if you were to put the cameras on teams at the top of the NFC, like you put the cameras on Michigan in that playoff room and see what the reaction's looking like, I guarantee people would breathe a lot more sigh of relief seeing the Minnesota Vikings than they would the Los Angeles Rams right now.
And you know what that counterpart is in the AFC? Pittsburgh is in the playoffs right now. Denver is not. Think anybody wants to see Denver in the playoffs the way they're playing? They'd beg to play Pittsburgh, unfortunately for the Steelers, because they just have nothing right now. But you have two teams on the outside looking in the AFC that I think people would love to see in the playoffs. Denver, the way they're playing, and just the story of the Texans. Even though they lose a game to the Jets, I mean, inexplicably, Zach Wilson has a game of his life because he just kind of threw caution to the wind and just let it go. And now you have the C.J. Stroud concussion to deal with. But Denver is a team that is just making that run right now and could put the fear of God in some teams in the playoffs.
Sean Payton, man, it was a rocky start to the season, but he has come in and delivered on pretty much everything you could have hoped for if you were a Denver Broncos fan when he made that announcement this past offseason here. The Texans, I'm with you, Dad. That was the team that felt like it for a while, but now you've got the Nico Collins injury yesterday to go along with Tank Dell being lost for the rest of the season, and things started to look a little bit different. It's not to say C.J. Stroud has not been excellent throughout the course of the season, but we also talked about he had great surroundings there between the protection that failed him yesterday and then the weapons that he had available to him. Coming up next, though, you said one of the names in Zach Wilson, who is definitely a contender for the all-weekend team. We'll highlight some of the best performers from on and off the football field next.
Welcome back to GoJo and Golic. It is time for the fellas to take a look back at their weekend and give us their all-weekend team. So, fellas, first team, second team, honorable mention. Who gets the honors this week?
It was a robust weekend, by the way. We had a lot of great choices on this that we won't even get to. But, Dad, I want to start off with the all-weekend honorable mention pick and go with maybe my favorite stat line in professional sports right now. I don't know if you saw, Jimmy Graham, in the year 2023, made not only a clutch catch inside the red zone for the Saints, but got in the end zone for this season's stat line of 3 targets, 2 receptions, and 2 touchdowns on the year. Jimmy Graham, who this offseason was a headline in re-signing with the Saints that I had to look at multiple times to make sure I wasn't getting a darn Scherfted, and has now parlayed that into an incredibly limited but effective role, and an ultimate he's still in the league player right now.
It is amazing, isn't it? I mean, I love after his one touchdown, he went like he was going to do the slam over the crossbar, which, of course, you get fined for now. You're not allowed to do. He did kind of the fake okey doke on that. That was pretty good. But it's been amazing what he has been able to do, and it is an incredible stat line. My honorable mention is going to be the Lakers for winning the first in-season tournament. And really, it's the Lakers because they won it. But I think the in-season tournament was a win. Something that I think you were where I was, but I certainly was skeptical. Players didn't even really know when those games were, of where this started in people's minds as to what the hell are they doing, to, wow, this is kind of exciting when you see the funky court and know there's one of those games. And then when it got down to the quarters and the semis, and then the finals, and the Lakers end up winning it. LeBron ends up being the MVP despite Anthony Davis playing out of his mind in that final game as they beat the Pacers 123-109. So I think that, and I'm giving it to the Lakers because they won it, but really overall, Mike, it's the in-season tournament. I definitely thought it turned out to be a hit. They celebrated with champagne in the locker room, all the players, and maybe more importantly, because they make a lot less outside of the head coach, the coaches got $500,000 per coach as well as per player, and they're in Vegas, so I want to know how many players went to the casinos and started gambling it away right then and there. But I thought an excellent ending for something that really turned me around during it, and I thought the in-season tournament was a hit.
Dad, I think you're right on everything except the proclivities for what they were going to do with the money. You might want to go gambling. I have a feeling a bunch of 20-something-year-old rich guys in Vegas are probably going to find other ways to spend their money around there with the nightlife available to them and all the clubs around there. So I'd imagine bottle service was plentiful for a lot of those Lakers players. But no, I'm with you. I wasn't sure how long it would take to take hold because it referenced the tournaments that we see in professional soccer over in Europe, and those are things that have a lot more history on their side and other things to point to here. They were able to manufacture this essentially out of nowhere and create meaning very early on in a way that's a huge win for Adam Silver and company, but congrats to the Lakers. Dad, for the second team all-weekend team, I'm going to go Army football. They win the Commander-in-Chief's trophy this year. They get a 17-11 win over Navy that included a goal line stand on a 4th and 2 QB sneak that Navy attempted as the buzzer was sounding on this game. Dad, I want to ask you, though, did it feel less like Army-Navy than usual because of the fact that we had, I believe, 40 combined passing attempts between these two teams, over 40 combined passing attempts and over 200 yards of passing yards in this game where we saw more shotgun plays in the Army-Navy game than maybe ever before.
Stunning. Absolutely stunning. I mean, I'm with you. It looked different. And maybe these teams, are finally having to get into the now of saying you got to pass the ball to get something done. But yeah, that's not your parents or your grandparents' Army-Navy games, that's for sure.
No, and a lot of the different rule changes around cut blocking and the things that normally the service academies running the triple option needed to be successful have changed so much that these guys have all of a sudden to, Jeff Munkin, who's been one of the architects of this, Brian Newberry, who took over for Ken Niumatalolo this year, they've been having to try and grapple with here. But this game still felt big, Dad. We got happy Bill Belichick on College Game Day as the guest picker there, putting on the helmet Lee Corso style. It's amazing when you just ask him to not talk about his football team, which normally would be a fun thing to talk about. This year, you can understand why he wants a little space between him and the Patriots. But when you just ask him to talk about lacrosse or Navy and the military academy football, the guy opens up like a flower.
Yeah, definite hint. If you ever see Belichick and you're going to start a convo, start it with lacrosse, and you'll get a better conversation. At least start there. All right, my second team, I gave it to the Lakers, and we talked about LeBron being MVP. My second team's going to go to his son, Bronny James, who made his debut in college basketball with USC. Now, they lost to Long Beach State. They were upset in that game. But remember, LeBron James' son, Bronny, practicing a few weeks ago, or a bit ago, went into cardiac arrest on the court and had to have a procedure done on his heart. I can't imagine as a parent how scary that would have to be to see your child go through that. He goes through the procedure and works his way back to making his first appearance in college basketball. He's on a minute restriction. I think he played 16 minutes, 4 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, 1 block shot, which really doesn't mean a whole lot. Just the fact that he got on the court and is playing, and hopefully we'll be able to put that aside, what happened, and he could be a regular, I don't know if you're ever regular when you're LeBron's kid, but be a regular basketball player now and not have to talk about it's his second game, it's his third game after a cardiac arrest and a heart procedure, that it can just be the norm of him playing basketball. But that was good to see for a scary moment that I wouldn't wish on anybody, to have at least this ending to it, but beginning to Bronny's career it was pretty cool to see. Had to be very emotional for LeBron and his wife.
You saw the post LeBron made about that. It is always cool to get to kind of see him slip into dad mode when we're so used to seeing him from one vantage point, how much pride he takes in the job that his kids have done in their own athletic careers and lives in general. Dad, let's get to first team here. I'll get out of the way quick on this one because we know what we really want to celebrate. I'll give it to Zach Wilson. Over 300 yards passing in this game. They get a big-time win over a Texans team everyone loves. It wasn't perfect, especially in the beginning for Zach Wilson, but people said he kind of came into this with a cut-it-loose attitude. Bleep you, he was just going to go after it. It showed. He played free, and the 2 times this year that's happened, this time and then really in the first half of that Chiefs game, you got the best of a prospect that ultimately isn't going to have a future with the Jets, but you saw here scratching the surface of what people liked at the beginning about him.
Yeah, he just, as he said, told his teammates, he said he's got nothing really to lose. He's been benched 3 times, what the hell is there to hold back for? So congrats to him. My first team is going to go, and listen, I've had my fun with kickers over the years, but it's going to a kicker. It's going to Brandon Aubrey, the place kicker for the Dallas Cowboys. People, you need to understand this story. He did not kick in college. He did not play football in college. He went to Notre Dame. He played on their soccer team. He played in the MLS minor league soccer system, and then he played 2 years with the Birmingham Stallions of the USFL. That was his kicking experience. He is now kicking in the first year for the Dallas Cowboys. He is 30 for 30 in field goals. He went into last night's game 26 of 26. He hit a 60-yarder, a 59-yarder, a 45-yarder, and a 50-yarder. And Mike, let me tell you, the 60-yarder and the 59-yarder went squarely into the net. Absolute room to spare. First kicker in NFL history to have two 59-plus field goals in the same game. He is perfect for the season in field goals. He is 30 for 30. His only misses, he actually has 3 extra point misses. The short kick he misses, the longer kick he makes. It's unbelievable. And as I mentioned, he plays soccer at Notre Dame. So quick shout out, as you and I Notre Dame grads, Notre Dame and Clemson in men's soccer play for the national championship today. So very cool for Notre Dame. Unbelievably cool for Brandon Aubrey. That dude is just playing out of his mind right now.
Notre Dame, I was going to say, is a kicking school because you got Blake Grupe, the former Notre Dame actual football starter, now kicking as the starter for the New Orleans Saints. Had a bit of an up and down year, but definitely a football school. The soccer team, between what they're doing in the NFL and actually on the field now. Good luck tonight, fellas. Give them hell. Let's see if Notre Dame can bring home their second men's title. right, guys, time to finish off the show the way we always do. This, that, and the third here on GoJo and Golic. 3 quick stories to send you off into the rest of your week. As always, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review us, leave us a 5-star rating, and try and come check us out here live Monday through Friday, 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern on Samsung TV Plus, Roku, the DraftKingsNetwork.com, or the DraftKings YouTube channel, any number of places there. And if you don't get a chance to watch us live from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern, you can get us wherever you get your podcasts. You can check in on the great guests that we have. Our thanks to Richard Sherman, former NFL All-Pro cornerback and current member of the Thursday Night Football broadcast team. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts, or right here available on YouTube as soon as we're done with the show. Guys, we will get to one of the most important games of the weekend, bar none, after we tell you about our friends at Wrangler. Guys, Wrangler supports us. You need to support them. Jean shirts and jackets that are made for the ride of life. We are brought to you by Wrangler. You can be ready for those cooler days and longer nights in styles that keep you warm, comfy, moving, and looking great no matter where you are. You can wear Wrangler jeans literally anywhere. At work, out at night, playing a pickup game, or with friends at home, watching the game on TV. They're that comfortable and that durable. I might be wearing them right now. You don't know, and the camera can't pan down that low. There's also a Wrangler for every occasion. Casual tees, snapper button-ups, or you can layer them together for a little bit of both. And don't forget about the iconic Wrangler jackets. When the weather starts to chill and you need to venture out, Wrangler will keep you ready for anything. Add some Wrangler to your getup with jean shirts and jackets that look great, fit great, and move great, so you're always ready for whatever life throws at you. And you can save 15% on your first Wrangler.com order when you use promo code GOJO15. Wrangler for the ride of life. And guys, let's get to a game that was truly a ride of life yesterday. The Las Vegas Raiders and the Minnesota Vikings. Dad, we're on the cusp of doing something that apparently we haven't done since the year that you were born, in almost ending regulation in a 0-0 tie.
What an ugly, ugly game. Unless you want to sit there and say it was a defensive struggle, but nobody ever wants to say that because everybody wants to see offense. The last tie at the end of regulation, November 7th, 1943, Giants-Lions. I mean, that's unbelievable. Now, again, this would have gone to overtime, but I'm just amazed. I kept seeing 0-0, 0-0. I'm like, how long is this going to go? First quarter. All of a sudden, it's halftime. Then we're into the fourth quarter, and you're like, are you kidding me? I mean, what? People paid money to see that game, and you know what? You can't get a refund.
No, but I do love the point in certain games where we all collectively flip the switch. The most recent time I can remember this happening was the Iowa-Nebraska game at college football end of regular season, where we flip that mode and adjust to sicko mode, where we realize, all right, we are now watching something that's objectively gross, but what if we start to appreciate it for that and chase greatness? And you guys saw the graphic, the old Frank Beamer graphic of the 0-0 Wake Forest Virginia Tech tie that we were now chasing the high of at the NFL level. So, Dad, there was at least that hope, and I do enjoy that moment because it's a reminder to appreciate what we have. We're coming up on the end of the NFL's regular season. We're already in bowl season for college football. You're going to miss this. You're going to want this back. You're going to wish these days hadn't gone by so fast. These can be some good times if you just take a good look around and realize that sometimes a tie can be beautiful, especially when no one scores points. So, it was a wonderful day. We almost had it. We're going to have to move on now to that, Jesse, which is maybe you can qualify this as a bit of the Shohei Ohtani effect, as the Los Angeles Dodgers are now one step closer to gondolas.
Yeah, so the proposal to construct a gondola connecting Dodgers Stadium to downtown LA's Union Station, it's overcome a significant obstacle. They released their final environmental impact report, and apparently it's good. So that was good that they, aren't going to mess up the environment. It's saying that the aerial tram is going to alleviate traffic congestion, reduce pollution in surrounding neighborhoods. So it looks like we're moving in the right direction here. But is it the right direction? Like, you live in LA, GoJo. Are you going to take a train to Union Station to then get on a gondola to go to Dodger Stadium?
I would say this in very limited experience, but one of the things I've heard from all my friends locally around here, and I got to experience once or twice, is anything to help alleviate the traffic leaving Dodger Stadium is a welcome respite, at least in my mind. Now, there's some things about, that have been disputed there locally with some of the surrounding neighborhoods, some extremely local politics type stuff. There's also the fact that the person in charge of this process is Frank McCourt, who's the former billionaire owner of the Dodgers that most fans hate around here. So you got to factor all that into it. So again, bad messenger in this situation, but just the general premise, getting in and out of Chavez Ravine and all that entails is a bit of a nightmare. So I do appreciate people thinking creatively, even if it's not the easiest sell in the world.
I would love it. I would love going to a game in a gondola. I think that would be so cool. I think it would be awesome. I hope so. And I get it with all the surrounding things that you just mentioned, Mike. But I'm just tunnel vision to going on a gondola, going to a game and going, yeah, I'm in.
But I don't know. I just feel like if you're on a gondola, it should be because you're about to go skiing. I don't know. It's something about the gondola over traffic highway. It doesn't sit right with me.
You got to expand, right? It can be used for other ways, other forms, obviously in this case, other forms of transportation. I think, Jesse, we have to open our minds here and look at the possibilities. I'm all for it. Would you not want to do this?
That thing is going to get stuck, and you're going to be stuck on the gondola, swinging back and forth right there. I would do it after it had been running for a little while.
Let somebody else deal with the bad stuff.
Yeah.
I do worry about sports fans and their proclivity for fighting in confined spaces where alcohol is also going to be a factor. I need to know what the policy is on this. If it's like a train where you can drink, because that train travel, awesome for that reason. Pre-gaming on the way to an event, getting a nice train ride in where you can be productive, potentially get a little bit of a buzz on there, how that's going to work in the gondola system, because now all of a sudden, close quarters and being suspended over a bunch of other stuff, a little bit more of a dangerous game when it comes to that. So a lot of things that we need to work out there. But Dad, I'm with you. Gondola, objectively cool form of transportation. Kind of like a blimp, but on a string. And I'm a big fan of blimps as someone who has at one point been up in the Goodyear blimp. Pretty cool deal. Gondola, its close second cousin. Yeah, Jesse, I got to go in the Goodyear blimp once. It's basically like being out in the open. You feel like you're in the air. The windows are huge. You take off at a really steep angle. It's incredible.
I would be very scared of that. But
be awesome.
Speaking of things that are very scary and involve steep angles, let's get to the third, Jesse, because Six Flags might be flirting with the line a little bit on this one here. A roller coaster that may even be a little rich for my taste.
Yeah, I read about this. So the skyscraper-sized Exa roller coaster, which is a term that refers to any ride over 600 feet high, it's going to boast a maximum drop of 640 feet. The 14-passenger train will be able to achieve speeds of up to 156 miles per hour. So it's going to be the fastest, the biggest, the highest roller coaster. Would you even get on this thing, or is this just a heart attack immediately?
Oh, I'm getting on it. Absolutely.
You're getting on it.
Yeah. I love roller coasters. Absolutely love. Throw me with speed, drop me down a hill, I'm good. Spin me, and I'm done. The teacups at Disney World would make me throw up. The teacups, because they spin around. Anything that spins. How about that ride, the rotor, where you stand against the wall, it spins around, and the floor drops, and because of the centrifugal force, you're stuck against the back wall. Nope, my day is ruined. Give me the rock and roller coaster that jets you right out of the takeoff at Disney. Give me any roller coaster. I am game. I would ride this in a heartbeat.
The rotary sucks when you're fat, too, because you just end up getting hung by your own clothes as you slide down the wall a little bit. At least that's my personal experience. But the Falcon's Flight, Dad, I'm with you. Just because it's new. When we think of roller coaster issues and all those videos you see of ones breaking down, they're old ones that have been around for years. I'd imagine if anything is going to be up to code in this day and age, it's going to be the brand new roller coaster that's traveling at speeds that people can't possibly comprehend. So I would actually feel more comfortable riding this one than just about any other roller coaster at this point, given all the weird internet videos that I have seen. If you enjoy the roller coaster ride that is this podcast, make sure you download, subscribe, rate, review, leave us that 5-star rating. Check us out on the DraftKings YouTube channel. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you tomorrow.